Hey everyone, Cody Hayes here, and I'd like to welcome you to part 2 as we look at bioethics. In this case, we're looking at euthanasia, the concept of merciful killing. And this is where we left off. We left off with, one of the arguments that is made in favor of euthanasia, and that would be the libertarian principle, liberty, that if a person wants to end his or her life, he or she should have the right to do so. Another argument made in favor of euthanasia is a benevolent or humanitarian principle. And this argument is that if a person is suffering, then it is our duty to let that suffering come to an end. Simply put, here, in this case, euthanasia would be the right thing to do. That if a person is suffering, it would be our proper duty to end that suffering in some manner, letting the person die on grounds of mercy. Another argument made in favor of euthanasia is that life, that term life, that word life, is more than its biological definition. There are a couple of points to mention here, with life being more than its biological definition. Consider, for example, someone in a vegetative state. Is that person alive? According to the biological definition of life, yes, that person is. But is that person alive from a realistic point of view? Well, that's where you start to get a variety of different answers. Another argument made in favor of euthanasia is that regardless of the various forms of euthanasia discussed previously, the end result is still the same. So, even if we're talking about, active euthanasia or passive euthanasia, regardless of how you want to look at it, the end result is still the same, and that is death. And hopefully, it would be death on grounds of mercy, hence the term euthanasia. But the fact that I use the word hopefully there might lead into, or certainly show, some of the arguments that are made against the practice of euthanasia. One argument being that euthanasia is not an individual act. Someone else is often involved. I would say, if anything, this is an argument against the libertarian principle. The notion that if an individual wants to take his or her life, he or she should be allowed to do so. Well, often at times, that is not the case with euthanasia. someone else is usually involved. And will that other person even make this a merciful killing? Or would it even be considered, objectively speaking, a merciful killing? And there's some other points that'll focus on that one. But another argument that's made against euthanasia is that the purpose of the medical profession is to save life, not to take it. One of the points really made earlier, I think, about euthanasia not being an individual act is that there's someone else involved, and that person that's involved is someone who is usually part of the medical profession. And by being involved in euthanasia, is that a violation of their Hippocratic oath? The notion of saving life and not taking it? Some would argue yes there, and others would of course say no. And those that would argue no would say, well, it would depend on the particular circumstances and whatnot. Another argument made against euthanasia is, who is to determine what is the quality of life? When I mentioned previously one of the arguments that is made in favor of euthanasia, it is, or was the statement, life is more than its biological definition. And what I was focusing on was in many respects, the quality of life. But, who gets to determine what is the quality of life? The quality of life could, in some respects, be relative. Another argument against euthanasia is that while the end result, that would be death, may be the same, the factors that led to the end result may not be. And let me have a quick sip of water and I'll focus a bit on this one here. This one relates to the notion particularly that euthanasia is not an individual act. There is someone else that's involved. And one of the things with the medical profession, and particularly with bioethics, has been to sometimes keep, scientists, doctors, in line, not to act unethically. Because think of it from this perspective. Okay, someone, in whatever manner, agree to euthanasia, or maybe not agree to it, we don't know. But you have another person there. Euthanasia, allowing the person to die on grounds of mercy. Well, yes, the end result might be the same, but unless someone else is present to all this, how do we not know that the other individual might do something to the person that might not be grounds of mercy, such as performing experiments on said person. Because if no one else is present, who's going to complain? Certainly not the medical professional, not the doctor. Obviously, the person who was euthanized can't say anything because that person's dead. And to perhaps just maybe emphasize this point more of where I'm going, back certainly over 100 years ago, and I'll say as I'm recording this lecture, Halloween was not too long ago, and think of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and the digging up of corpses, grave robbery. Often at times, individuals involved in grave robbing were scientists because they wanted a corpse to perform experiments on. And if they were ever caught, they would often say in their defense that they did it in the name of science. So that's often, brought up the issue of, bioethics. But, again, going back to euthanasia and using that example there too to emphasize the point I made earlier, the end result may be the same, that is death. But what about the factors that led to the end result? Well, if there's only one person that can talk and explain what happened, and that person's arguably not going to, well then no one's going to know. So, in other words, that death might not have been on merciful grounds, per se. Another argument made against euthanasia, last one here, is that if anything, euthanasia reflects only a tiny minority. The notion that's being made here is that one of the unique characteristics about the human species is to stay alive as long as possible. So somebody not reflecting that would have to be a very, very small minority. Because, again, if the notion is that we try to stay alive as long as possible, then how many individuals really are going to say, I want to die? And actually mean it? Not very many, if we follow through with that. Well, in any case, that's all that we have on this particular lecture in bioethics. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to send me a message in the Q&A forum or send me an email. Till then, take care.